Ayy, look, ayy. I'm in the lab like Dexter, brand new batch he tested. I'm with all the extras, don't try and bitch, I'm pressure. I'm the type to step on steppers, I'm the type to step on steppers. I'm the type to step on steppers, I'm the type to step on steppers.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the New Media Podcast. I'm your host, Ya. We hope you enjoyed the last episode because, as always, today's going to be an even better episode. I got the whole crew with me. Everybody's in the house today. And today, in our last episode, we talked about the NFC East. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the AFC South. We'll go ahead and give our record predictions for them and every team in that division. We'll also talk about whether or not people should buy into the Jacksonville Jaguars hype coming into this season. Then we'll talk about who's in a better position to succeed between Anthony Richardson and CJ Stroud, two rookie quarterbacks starting for their two respective franchises. And then we'll go ahead and talk about DeAndre Hopkins going to the Tennessee Titans a couple of weeks ago and how much he will move the needle for that Tennessee Titans football team. But, of course, temperature check, how's everybody doing today?
We're feeling great, man. You know, training camp is going on. That's the only real update we have from sports. You know, there isn't much going on but to just monitor your teams. But let's get talking about this division, man. This division where last season it kind of stunk until like the latter half of the second part of the season. But I'm ready to talk about it. Let's get it.
Yeah, man. Very excited that football's back. You know what, like 2-3 days away from our first preseason game. This next month is going to be fun. There's going to be a lot to talk about. We're going to go through the divisions and stuff. And excited to talk about this division. A lot of young stars in this division. So we'll see what happens.
Hey, man, I'm excited just as you guys are, but let's go ahead and jump right into it. We'll talk AFC South. We'll go ahead and give our predictions there. We'll do a little bit differently in comparison to our last episode. We won't do the game-by-game predictions. We'll just give our record predictions and also our standing predictions for those four teams in that division. So, of course, Abdi will kick us off there.
All right. So, winning this division, I have the Jacksonville Jaguars. I have them finishing 11-6. Next, at number 2, I have the Tennessee Titans. Going 10-7. At number 3, I have the Houston Texans going 6-11, and at last place, I got the Colts going 4-13.
Yeah, for me, I pretty much got the same exact standings, but I got the Jags going 10-7. I got the Titans going 9-8. Houston, I have Houston right here sitting at 5-12, and then I'll have the Colts in at 4-13.
For my standing predictions, I got from the AFC South. For number 1, I got the Jags going 10-7, 2 Titans going 9-8, 3 Colts going 7-10, and 4 Texans going 6-11. I think people need to know why you have the Colts finishing dead last in this division with everything going on in their locker room right now.
I mean, this isn't even counting the Jonathan Taylor situation. That's something where, there's a lot of stuff that maybe happens in the background that we're not aware of. But just talking about the team overall, Anthony Richardson, he's a project player. Even if we were to liken him to someone like Justin Fields, at the end of the day, Justin Fields came in as a better pocket passer. He's an overall better passer than Anthony Richardson. Well, Anthony Richardson has the athletic traits and the tools. I'm not particularly, confident in his ability to come in and, provide this team with any semblance of a passing attack. They did pick up Shane Steichen as their offensive coordinator, who we did work with Jalen Hurts, and Jalen Hurts had his best season under him. But I'm not particularly confident about Anthony Richardson's ability to be a pocket passer at this point. I think he's a project player. It's going to take a while, and I'm not particularly sure how this offense is going to look outside it. I do think that they're going to have a fun rushing attack if they're able to keep Jonathan Taylor there and they don't trade him. I think that combination, Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor, can be a fun rushing attack. But overall, as a complete quarterback, I don't think he's there yet.
I mean, I think that's fair to say. But I think what Big H, we had the Jacksonville Jaguars going 10-7, just like me.
Yeah.
Have we all take a look at their schedule? Have we took a look at their schedule yet?
I think they have amongst AFC South teams, I think they have the strongest schedule, like the hardest schedule out of the entire AFC South. But I think it's, what is it? Is it still considered average on the scale?
On the scale, it's still considered average because there's a lot of bottom tier teams.
I really don't think they have a tough schedule like that.
I think it's considered an average schedule, but out of like the AFC South teams, they have the hardest schedule. I know that.
I mean, they got a lot of tough matchups, man. They got a home game against KC. They got another home game against Buffalo. Niners at home.
Nah, that's not a
Bengals
home
at
game.
home.
It's not a home game.
What, the Niners game?
Buffalo one. That's a international.
Oh, 6:30 game. I didn't peep that.
They back
Niners home, Bengals home, Ravens home. So majority of their tough games are at home, but it's still tough games nonetheless. And then of course you have to take into account those divisional games. And so, for these guys to take a 2-game leap from what they did last year, it's not much, but yeah, at the end of the day, I feel like this division is a dogfight between the Tennessee Titans and them because just how good both those teams are. Regardless of how we feel about the Titans, they're always going to be one of those teams that kind of find themselves competing in the AFC. But Texans, though, man, Texans with CJ Stroud in year one under a new head coach, finishing better than the Indianapolis Colts. I don't know. I can't seem to wrap my head around that one.
I feel a little bit more confident in CJ Stroud coming in as a quarterback from day one than I do about Anthony Richardson. If Anthony Richardson is going to be even the guaranteed starter, I don't know if the reports have come out if he's going to be 100% a guarantee to start, but I feel more confident CJ Stroud walking in as a starter. I just feel like him coming out of Ohio State, he's more prepared than someone like Anthony Richardson. We know why Anthony Richardson was taken that high because of his athletic tools. He has a rocket of an arm, his ability to extend plays. But, even when you look at Justin Fields last year, it was a struggle for him passing the ball. And, is that going to be the same situation for Anthony Richardson, who's even less accurate than someone like Justin Fields? So I'm not too bought into the Colts hype, if there even is any.
Yeah, those two teams might finish with the same record.
I mean, yeah, I'm not gonna. They're both gonna be.
They're not far behind each other. They're not.
They might not. They might end up not being far behind each other. But I just feel like the Texans, they kind of win a little bit more, attempting. I feel like people are under. I think the Texans are attempting in their minds to get a lot more wins than they did last year because they traded away. I think their next year's pick for Will Anderson, and so it seems like in their minds that they want to compete more in this division. Maybe not necessarily win the division, but it does seem like they are attempting to compete against these teams in this division. So, I don't see that same, semblance for the Colts.
That's fair. Right now, I'm looking at last year's standings where the Jacksonville Jaguars finished winning this division at 9-8. The Tennessee Titans were at 7-10. The Colts were at 4-12. And then the Houston Texans were at 3-13-1, along with the Colts being at 4-12-1. So you basically got the Colts being pretty much the same as they were last year, but the Houston Texans taking a little bit of a leap in comparison to last year. 3-13, going up to what? You had them at 6-7 wins.
Yeah, 6 wins.
6-7 wins.
I don't think they go up that much.
They're gonna. I mean, Will Anderson's gonna come in. I think he's going to have an impact. They have CJ Stroud as their quarterback. They have, John Michie, maybe if he takes a leap. They have Derek Stingley, and they have another cornerback. I forgot his name. Was it Shaquille Griffin? Who was it? They picked up another corner. So the team is kind of fun. I do think that their pass catches are a little bit weak, but they did bring in some pieces. So I'm excited to see how CJ Stroud does, and of course DeMeco Ryan, and they hired an offensive coordinator from San Francisco, so they're definitely going to look to build around CJ Stroud.
Let's go ahead and move on to the Jacksonville Jaguars and their hype. This is something I've actually been wanting to talk about for quite some time now. These guys, the Jacksonville Jaguars, were a team that finished the season 9-8 last year, found themselves sneaking into the playoffs after reeling off a chunk of wins towards the end of the season, peaking at the right time. They also won themselves a playoff game in dramatic fashion, coming back against that in that home game versus the Los Angeles Chargers. But for right now they're considered one of the top teams in the AFC. They're not Super Bowl contenders, but they are playoff contenders. So I guess my question to you guys would be, should people buy into the Jacksonville Jaguars hype?
100%. I think people should. I mean, this is all really dependent, especially offensively, on the. If this is the version of Calvin Ridley, what version are we going to be getting? Are we going to be getting that 2020 version? Because people don't understand a guy who's been absent for football for that long. He could be extremely rusty. It could be a tough task for him to return to that version. But if I do expect Calvin Ridley to return to that 2020 version where he had about 1,300 yards and 9 touchdowns, and that elevates his offense a lot more. Now you have an offense that has Travis Etienne, you have Evan Ingram, you have Zay Jones, you have Christian Kirk, and you have Calvin Ridley. And of course, Trevor Lawrence is at the helm of it. He's the guy that's leading the charge. I think that's a super pass-heavy attack that allows them versatility with Travis Etienne, who's a pass-catching back, and he's a good runner as well. I think he averaged about 5 yards a carry. So this offense, to me, it's gonna boom. It's one of those offenses I think are gonna be one of the best in the NFL. So last season, it was a combination of course, Doug Peterson. It's a new head coach, new system. Travis Etienne was coming back from his injury. This team was attempting to get back to or trying to figure out their way. They're 3-7 before their bye, and then they started reeling off wins. Trevor Lawrence really started to pick up his play, and so I am confident in this team. I do think people should buy into the hype for the Jacksonville Jaguars, especially with picking up someone like Calvin Ridley. I mean, this guy can end up being a top 10 wide receiver this season. I do think his talent wise he is there, but he can establish himself firmly in that group.
I believe people should buy into this hype. Extremely young team, fantastic coach they have. They're building on that offense, especially with Calvin Ridley coming in this year. And last year, Trevor Lawrence, people had questions about him. I think it was like, week 8, week 9 after they faced the Eagles and they lost that game. And they're like, is he that type of person? Can he pick up the slack? Can he, show us that he's that quarterback that can take that next level step? He did that the rest of the season, and he showed that first playoff game against the Chargers. So for me, I feel like, just getting the addition of Calvin Ridley, the offense just meshing again together with Zay Jones there, with Travis Etienne, and even Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram came back, and he looked like he looked like a top 5 tight end on that team. And I just feel like once they get that consistency and once they get more practices under belt, that offense it's a fire offense. And defense, especially, they can build on that. They have a fantastic young corner named Tyson Campbell.
They need what's his name to take a leap though. Trayvon Walker.
Yeah, Trayvon Walker. We talked about that pick last year. Them taking him first pick. You got to produce as a first pick. You can't have 1-2 games that you're fantastic, and then a 6-game drought, 7-game drought, and then show up another game. You got to be there all 17 games of the season. You got to be that young star that they drafted, that number 1 pick. So for me, if he comes in this year and he shows that off, they got a team that can compete. Maybe
Tyson Campbell's a good mention too. He's nice,
Tyson Campbell's a nice cornerback. So they got stuff to build on, and they're a young team. We don't expect Super Bowl from them immediately, but in a couple years, I do expect a Super Bowl from that young team. So we'll see.
And I think it's what's his name, Josh Allen's contract year.
Josh Allen, the DNA. He's been phenomenal on that team too. He's been hooping. So players on contract years, they tend to eat. They want to get paid. So expect him to come out the gates firing. And I'll buy into the hype in this team.
I'm gonna have to firmly disagree. I can't lie. I think I'm not gonna sit here and say the Jacksonville Jaguars aren't a good team. I think they're a very, very great team. But the thing is, when I look at this when I look at this division as a whole, obviously the 2 teams at the bottom, the Colts and the Texans, are not going to be, teams that sniff the Jacksonville Jaguars. But I look at a team like the Tennessee Titans, a team that's always been great defensively. Mike Vrabel, he's always done a great job. Again, those guys ready to go and ready to play. And of course, we'll talk about it in a little bit. Him acquiring DeAndre Hopkins. Now he has some weapons to work with offensively. And I think last year, although these guys started off the season 3-7 going into their bye week, and they ended up reeling off a lot more wins, the Tennessee Titans had this division locked up for majority of the season up until Ryan Tannehill got hurt, and they ended up having to throw in Malik Willis into the fire. Malik Willis didn't show much; he didn't produce much, and so they weren't able to keep their head above water for the rest of the season, which pretty much left the door open for a team like the Jacksonville Jaguars to kind of capitalize on that opportunity to take that number 1 seed along with a home playoff game. And so, I feel like a lot of people have pushed away what the Jacksonville Jaguars did in that first half of the season, where they went 3-7 going into their bye, and pretty much put a lot of their emphasis, a lot of their eyes on what they did in the second half of the season when they just started to reel off a lot more wins. And they only lost 1 game in that stretch, which was that second game coming off the bye to the Detroit Lions at home, on the road, losing pretty badly. But we all know how firepower of an offense the Detroit Lions were last year. So They beat the Baltimore Ravens, and that game was a close one. The Tennessee Titans wasn't a close one. The Cowboys was an overtime game. The Jets at that point, they were reeling off a long losing streak with Mike White at quarterback. The Houston Texans on the road, they pretty much smoked them 31-3. And then they closed out the season winning a very, very tight game against the Tennessee Titans at home on, I think that was a Sunday night game or Monday night game, 20-16. And I think there was some quarterback that was under center that wasn't Malik Willis or Josh Dobbs was playing quarterback for the Tennessee Titans that night. And so I think, the Jacksonville Jaguars, they'll do amazing things this year. I think Doug Peterson as the head coach has done a great job at scheming up a lot of stuff for his wide receivers. I mean, Christian Kirk had himself a hell of a year last year. Marvin Jones did himself a pretty solid. Evan Ingram. And of course, we all know Travis Etienne, year two, that pretty much year one for him since he was out this first year. So, I think they'll be a very great team. But I think the way people are describing this team, they're pretty much saying that it's going to be pretty much a landslide between them and the Tennessee Titans for the winner of this division. And that doesn't sit right with me. I think it's a lot closer than people think. So for me, I think we should pump the brakes a little bit, because then if we don't, then the expectations are going to be through the roof. What are we expecting out of Trevor Lawrence year two, coming off a playoff win? It's something that Justin Herbert doesn't even have, and he beat him to get that win. So I think, hypothetically speaking, these guys do have a tough record outside of, the half of the record, the half of their schedule where it's, they play some bottom tier teams. It's going to be interesting to see how they match up with a lot of these teams, man. Kansas City's a top team, Buffalo, Niners, and they have to play the Ravens, the Browns, the Bengals. They also have to play the Pittsburgh Steelers as well. So, a lot of those teams aren't slouches, and it's going to be interesting to see how the Jacksonville Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence match up with the rest of the league, because they've yet to beat Kansas City. Kansas City is a team that they struggle with, but they're kind of like the measuring stick. Obviously Kansas City is a Super Bowl team, and whenever you play Kansas City, you kind of test yourself to see where the team is at in terms of being a championship contender or just a playoff contender. And so, for me, I think people got to slow down with this hype. Jacksonville Jaguars, they're a great team. I know Big H was extremely high on them last year, but it wasn't looking so good up until that bye, man.
I mean, the thing is, though, it's hard not to buy into the hype about this team. I don't know what we're pumping the brakes for. I mean, the team that just picked up a guy in Calvin Ridley, naturally you're gonna, and they're young as well. So naturally, the only way that we should view them is a team that's gonna improve on what they had last season, which is they were 9-8. So naturally, when we look at this team, they picked up Calvin Ridley. We're gonna be like, okay, they're a young team, they're improving, they're only just gonna get better from this point on. Of course, we're going to hype them. I don't think anyone's saying the Jacksonville Jaguars are a Super Bowl contender, but it makes sense to hype them coming up to this season. This is definitely, when I look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, they're definitely an offense that can go toe-to-toe with about anybody. I mean, you have Zay Jones, you have Christian Kirk, you have Evan Ingram, you have Calvin Ridley, you have Travis Etienne, you have Trevor Lawrence. That's an offense that can go against, with Doug Peterson coaching them, that's an offense that can go against anybody. So, I mean, I find it hard not to hype this team. I think, people should hype this team because of what they did last year. And then coming into this season, how much they can improve.
Speaking of Calvin Ridley, a guy they did acquire in this past offseason, what is the expectation for him coming into this season?
I think at least 1,000, above 1,100 yards. He has basically, because they have Christian Kirk there, he's going to be their wide receiver too. But Calvin Ridley is going to be the number one option. They needed a guy that's an elite route runner, and I think he's going to be at least a 1,200 yard type of wide receiver under Trevor Lawrence. I think Doug Peterson is going to scheme the same way he schemed up these guys, Zay Jones and Christian Kirk, open. He's going to be able to scheme up Calvin Ridley, and he's an elite route runner. He's a separator. I think he's going to be able to get to his spot. So I do have the expectation of a 1,200. I mean, that guy, at the same time, we do understand that he has been away from football for a long time. And so, it's a question mark of how good he's going to really look on the NFL field. But, I don't really have much doubts about that. I think he's going to look excellent.
I expect him to be, a one on the team. I expect him to take that number one spot. I expect him to be a number one receiver that he was before. And, him being off for 2 years, I feel like mentally and, health-wise, he's healthy. He's coming back into football in prime shape, prime health. We've seen the little videos on Twitter and everything, the explosive speed, his get off, the route running ability. I feel like he's going to have a phenomenal year. Abdi said, 1,100 yards, 1,200 yards? I believe, 1,200 yards. Christian Kirk is a true slot receiver, so it doesn't take anything away from him. They just put him in that outside spot where DJ Chark was, and he's a top receiver for me. So, the offense is going to be very open with Christian Kirk there, with Evan Ingram there, with the run game being as great as it is. They're going to have a lot of options, and there's going to be a lot of one-on-ones left on the field for them. So, I expect Calvin Ridley to eat. I expect him to be the number one receiver he was before, and I expect him to have a great season.
Well, for me, man, Calvin Ridley, very, very strong love-hate relationship with that guy. I think the last time he played football, that's when I had him on my fantasy team and pretty much wasn't producing anything for me. And then
shout out to him for the year before, though. That's why I had him.
mental health break. And then next thing you know, he's not playing for the rest of the season. I traded a lot of my assets to get that guy, man. I handed a championship to somebody we know. But, I think Calvin Ridley, it's just going to be interesting to see how he's going to look, being away from football for so long. Obviously we saw it with Deshaun Watson last year, towards the end of the season where he came back and he didn't look so great. I wonder what that looks like, for a wide receiver that's been away for so long. Calvin Ridley is about 28 now. I just found that out a couple weeks ago.
And he's still on his rookie contract. It's wild.
So he's been in the league for quite some time now, and he's getting up there in age, and obviously receivers their prime is a little bit longer than a lot more other positions, but I think he probably cracks over 1,000 yards, probably around 1,000 to 1,100. The touchdowns is going to be something that's going to be interesting for me. Is he going to be that red zone threat for Trevor Lawrence? Obviously Trevor Lawrence is going to a lot of guys last year. Christian Kirk being his number one, Evan Ingram, Zay Jones, and also Travis Etienne being the dual threat running back that he is coming out of the backfield. And so I think I'm interested to see how Calvin Ridley kind of fits himself in this red zone offense. Is he gonna be that main target, the go-to guy? When they get down there and they need a touchdown, or is he just gonna be that guy that kind of breaks the sticks and gets the team in that position, and then somebody else finishes the job? So, it's gonna be interesting to see for the Jacksonville Jaguars, man. Obviously they have a lot of firepower on offense. It's gonna be, and I'm also interested to see how Travis Etienne does. as a true 3-down back. I'm hearing stuff right now coming out of training camp that the rookie that they drafted, Gibbsby or something like that, is going to be in the mix as well. But obviously, we all know their best running back is Travis Etienne, and when he has the ball, it's something special. But obviously, we all know the toll running backs take in this league, and if he's not able to be a true 3-down running back, then somebody else is going to be in for for those 3rd-down situations. But for the Jacksonville Jaguars, man. For me personally, just got to pump the brakes a little bit. Although they have all these nice toys, and they've been on the biggest stage, they've won themselves a playoff game. I know that their confidence is sky high coming into this season. The expectations are set a little high for me, but it's going to be interesting to see how they exceed all those expectations once week 1 rolls around and the season begins. But with that being said, we'll go ahead and move on to our next topic, which is who's in a better position to succeed between Anthony Richardson and CJ Stroud.
I want to say technically it is someone like Anthony Richardson because, when you're a rushing quarterback naturally and you have that level of athleticism, like if you look at Justin Fields, you're still in some way able to be productive because you're able to, sustain drives by rushing and escaping sacks and, using your athleticism to get out of certain positions. And, this guy's going to be coached by Shane Steichen. And as I mentioned before, he did work with Jalen Hurts. He was the offensive coordinator for the Eagles when they had that great season last year. So I do think that technically Anthony Richardson is in a better position to succeed. But it won't necessarily translate to him succeeding just because I feel like the rawness of his game is going to show. On the NFL field, it's not as easy as college as being able to just simply rush around and get around it. And I do believe this guy's easily the most athletic quarterback in the NFL, maybe in NFL history. And he's still going to be able to rush it and get out to out of the pocket. But at the same time, at some point, you're going to have to be able to throw it. He's just too raw in that aspect for me to feel like he's going to succeed. So at this point, I lean towards more what CJ Stroud is going to be able to bring as a pocket passer and as a quarterback. But, I do think that Anthony Richardson is technically more in a better position to succeed.
I mean, for the position Anthony Richardson was put in with the talent around him, with Jonathan Taylor, with the Eagles offensive coordinator, with Michael Pittman, he does have the better pieces. He does have a better situation to step in. But for me, it's just who's going to be the better quarterback, regardless of what talent they have around him. And I believe that's going to be CJ Stroud. I feel like he's going to He's going to be the best piece available on this offensive team. And compared to Anthony Richardson not being the best piece, is going to be either, Taylor or other players are going to step up, and people are going to test him to throw. And we haven't really seen him throw. He's a raw thrower, and it's going to be a tough situation. But for me, I've always been a big CJ Stroud fan. Yeah, that pocket presence that he has, and the awareness and everything. So for me, I think CJ Stroud is going to be the much better quarterback to succeed. And Anthony Richardson, I feel like, is going to take some time, but I do feel like he's going to develop to that quarterback that the Colts want.
I think for me, as you guys all know, I think I'm a very big Anthony Richardson guy. I think, although he's not all there in terms of a passer, coming into the league, he's a pure raw talent. And obviously he's a work in progress. He's a true project guy under center in week 1 to start off the year. I just think that, we might see him struggle a little bit. I think we'll see him struggle for the beginning of the first half of the season, I would say, but kind of pick it up towards the end of the season, kind of like how Justin Fields was last year, where he was struggling, heavily for the first half, and then towards that late stretch, end of the season, he started to pick it up, started to utilize his legs a lot more, use to get some touchdowns, put some points on the board, using his arm, just kind of finding guys in the right spots. I think Anthony Richardson is probably going to be similar to what Justin Fields did last year. And then for me, CJ Stroud, my only issue is kind of like just the weapons that's pretty much around him. I know they signed Dalton Schultz, like they signed Robert Woods. Their backfield contains Dameon Pierce and Devin Singletary, so those guys will be sharing the backfield for a little bit. But DeMeco Ryans is a defensive coordinator, so I'm interested to see what type of offense the Houston Texans come out with, to start off the year. Are they going to let CJ Stroud just kind of air it out, just let him, use his cannon of an arm? Or are they just kind of going to try to play it safe with him, kind of use him as a game manager for a little bit until, they reach some point in the season when they're just like, we got to take the training wheels off. And so, I understand, though, obviously Anthony Richardson, not the best passer, wasn't a good passer in college, just really utilized his legs to kind of get himself out of good positions. And his God-given talent and his ability, as a rusher. But, I don't think these two guys are far off from each other. I just think that at the end of the day, regardless of the Jonathan Taylor situation, Jonathan Taylor only really helps this Colts team. Obviously, he's their best offensive weapon and coming off a bad year. And if he plays this year at any point, obviously he's going to want to play pretty hard because it's a contract year. And with that whole situation going on, it's going to be interesting to see if they ended up paying him. But it's going to be a huge help for a guy like Anthony Richardson, because you can do a whole lot on the offensive side of the ball. You can do a whole lot of read options. And then obviously they have a lot of weapons, Alec Pierce, Michael Pittman, that rookie that they drafted, Josh Downs. And so, the Colts have some toys. It's just really going to come down to Anthony Richardson and whether or not he wants to, if he's going to be able to utilize all of his toys to the best of his ability. But I trust that situation and that offense, especially with taking in the Eagles offensive coordinator and now putting him as the head coach, more than I do a defensive situation with the Houston Texans. I think the Houston Texans, although they did trade, their first round pick for next year to the Cardinals, and they're going to be competing a lot. I think they're going to try to establish themselves more as a defensive team, just because of their head coach and where he comes from and who he is as a player, as a former player in this league. So, for me, I think Anthony Richardson I think on paper, CJ Stroud has the better statistics in comparison to Anthony Richardson. But when it comes to wins and losses, I think Anthony Richardson does edge him out in that situation. I think he probably finishes with maybe 1 or 2 more wins, which isn't much. But, in a division like that, where those two teams aren't necessarily competing, it's still something at the end of the day. But, it's crazy, one division, two rookie quarterbacks starting out. I think the future is pretty bright for both these franchises anyways, because I think at the end of the day, the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to need somebody to compete with them. The Tennessee Titans are there for right now, but, for the foreseeable future, who's going to be there to compete with them in the later half when it's just Trevor Lawrence running the show. So I think these two guys, if one of them was going to have to step up, one of these franchises are going to have to step up. And I think they're both in positions to succeed. But for me, I'd have to lean Anthony Richardson in this situation. But aside from all of that, we'll go ahead and move on to DeAndre Hopkins and his move to the Tennessee Titans. A couple of weeks ago, DeAndre Hopkins signed a 2-year, $26 million deal with this Tennessee Titans football team. After a long and awaited free agency, for him, after getting released by the Arizona Cardinals, he finally made his decision. Very questionable decision, in my opinion, but, it is what it is at this point. But How much does DeAndre Hopkins move the needle for this Tennessee Titans football team?
A huge amount. A huge amount. I mean, the Titans wide receivers, I think they're ranked dead last in separation last season. And, DeAndre Hopkins isn't necessarily like an elite separator, but what he is an absolute jump ball specialist. When you throw the ball to him, DeAndre Hopkins is going to get it. And they really struggled, especially in situations where Treylon Burks went out. And he had a bunch of good flashes last season whenever he was able to play. I specifically remember a huge catch that he had on Jair Alexander last season when they played us. So Treylon Burks is a really talented rookie, but they're missing him whenever he would get injured, and that's about it. They had no one else. So now this opens up the box for a guy like Derrick Henry, who's going to get a chunk of targets, and for Ryan Tannehill, it's going to only improve his efficiency, which he's really struggled with. As of recently, last season or so, that's where 2019, 2020 when he came in, his efficiency was through the roof, and he was able to throw the rock whenever he can. But now he's less efficient. So someone like DeAndre Hopkins is going to open up a lot for this team. I'm not saying they're wide receivers. Their wide receiver core is anything of like top 2 or top 3 or top 5 or anything of sort. But that's a solid combination that they have. And a lot of people are mentioning their tight end Okongwu. He had a really solid rookie season for them, and, at the tight end position. And I think Ryan Tannehill is going to have a solid amount of weapons at their disposal. This DeAndre Hopkins move is a very, very big one. Because if they didn't make this move, I mean, they would have went into the season with just their tight end and Treylon Burks, and that wouldn't have been enough. I think they needed another pass catcher, and picking up a guy who averaged about 80 yards a game last season, and I played some of his games with Kyler Murray and then some of them with Colt McCoy. I think this is a huge, huge step for him, and he's going to reestablish himself as a top wide receiver. I think DeAndre Hopkins, whenever he's played, he's produced, and so for this team to pick up a guy like that, it's a huge pickup.
This might push them into the 1 seed in that division. Like I said earlier, Titans and the Jacksonville two extremely close teams. This Titans defense last year, they held up a lot, especially without their best players, without Tannehill playing, without Henry playing a couple games. They still, they played up to par. So I feel like them being healthy this year, in the addition to DeAndre Hopkins, it gives them that elite receiver that they're missing since AJ Brown has left the team. And you pair him with Treylon Burks, a young and up and coming second-year receiver that can be phenomenal this year. It can be a big, big difference maker. It could be a big difference maker, especially for Derrick Henry. It just, for him to see a little more of an open box and seeing 8 to 9 guys every single time he's rushing the ball, for him to see 6 people or 5 people or, 7 people, it's a beautiful sight for him. And all Ryan Tannehill has to do is just, game manage the game, don't throw no interceptions, don't throw no turnovers, and find DeAndre Hopkins on those, key plays and those big routes for him. So I feel like this, it can catapult them to back winning the division. And DeAndre Hopkins is that type of guy. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, for starters, it's still very surprising to me why DeAndre Hopkins is a guy that's bouncing around the league. Not really necessarily bouncing around, but now he's on his 3rd team. And, obviously he's a top talent, top receiver whenever he's out there on the field. But at the end of the day, I feel like this move it needed to be done, especially after losing a guy like AJ Brown a couple years ago. Obviously they felt like they didn't need to pay AJ Brown, and next thing after going through a whole season without him, they realized they do need a top talent on that side of the ball in the wide receiver room, and they ended up getting one. So I understand the move. Obviously, you want to be able to compete, and you saw what happened last year. Like I said, these guys were pretty much in the driver's seat to win this division, and next thing you know, a lot of their key players go down, and then they weren't able to field themselves some wins because of those injuries. And so now you add a guy like DeAndre Hopkins into the mix. How much does he move the needle for these guys? Not so much, to be honest, in my opinion. Obviously, he's a great talent, but at the end of the day, the Tennessee Titans were always going to be that team that are just kind of knocking on the door. Either they're going to win the division, or they're going to, they're not going to make the wild card spot. So with DeAndre Hopkins added into the mix, they're kind of still in the same situation. It's either win the division or you miss the playoffs as a whole. And now they just kind of put themselves in a better position, to win the division, in a better position to compete with the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars went out and got Calvin Ridley. These guys had to answer, and they had to go ahead and get a guy like DeAndre Hopkins. So it made sense. But at the end of the day, the Tennessee Titans are kind of, for me, they're still the same team they were, from last season, but just with a stronger wide receiver room. I think Treylon Burks does take a strong year 2 leap, though. I think, For me, my hot take would be he leads the wide receiver room in yards over a guy like DeAndre Hopkins. I feel like, Ryan Tannehill is going to be able to rely on him a lot more than DeAndre Hopkins. And that's not necessarily saying that DeAndre Hopkins is going to be a guy that's, like a safety blanket or anything like that. But I think Treylon Burks in year 2, he's going to take a huge leap. And a lot of people aren't necessarily expecting it. They're just kind of expecting DeAndre Hopkins to kind of do his thing and Treylon Burks to be that wide receiver too. But it wouldn't shock me if Treylon Burks ended up as the wide receiver 1 for this Tennessee Titans football team. But for me, aside from all of that, what shocked me the most was the move in general for DeAndre Hopkins. Obviously landing on the Tennessee Titans is cool and all. He ended up getting his money, but going into this offseason, DeAndre Hopkins had a list of demands of what he wanted for his next move, for his future. And those are 3 things on the list. Number 1 being a stable management. Number 2 being a quarterback that loves the game. And number 3, he wanted to have a great defense. I think obviously the Tennessee Titans do have a great defense. They don't necessarily have stable management. And I'm not too sure how much Ryan Tannehill loves the game. So this move is kind of questionable in my eyes. I'm not too sure if you guys see it the same way.
I mean, yeah, I think it went against everything that he was going for. He mentioned he had a huge list of demands, and all of a sudden he's ending up on the Tennessee Titans. But when I look at this Tennessee Titans team, I don't really see it as the same team from last year, just because this team 2021, they had the most players on injury reserve, I think, in NFL history. They had about 36 players on injury reserve. Last year, I believe they used up 91 roster spots because of injuries. When it comes to injuries, I don't think any team was particularly close to this, Tennessee Titans team, and they are going heavily under the radar. And this DeAndre Hopkins moves the needle a lot, just because now they have at least somewhat of a stable offense. They have the ability to run with Derrick Henry and not have the box be packed. The only question mark for this team really is the offensive line. One of the offensive linemen, he is suspended for 6 games for gambling. They drafted Peter Skoronski, and I think he's going to be having an impact right away. But outside of that, their offensive line is very questionable. At best, at worst, I think is one of the bottom offensive lines in the league. But even then, they have a stable, wide receiver room and a tight end. They have a running back. Ryan Tannehill is not particularly the greatest of quarterbacks, but he's decent enough for them to guarantee wins. And the star power of this team is on the defensive line. This defense, they picked up Azeez Al-Shaair. They have Jeffrey Simmons, who they gave a huge contract to. They signed Arden Key from the Jacksonville Jaguars. This team have Harold Landry that's coming back from his ACL that he tore. They have one of the better safeties in the entire NFL who doesn't get mentioned enough, in Kevin Byard. And so I think this team's really, and then I believe they signed Sean Murphy from the Buccaneers. So, this team defensively, they're going to be solid. And I think offensively, picking up a guy like DeAndre Hopkins moves the needle a lot. So regarding his move, it went against everything that he stood for. It seems like he didn't really check off everything, but he got his money, and I think he's in a place where he's going to be utilized correctly. So
I think for me, it's the main part was the money. The teams that he listed, the quarterbacks that he listed that he wanted to play with, those teams are all tied up in cap space. He wanted his $17-18 million. How much was it? What, $19 million per year? I'm not too sure how much it was that he was trying to get. And a lot of those teams, they didn't want to drop his contract. They wanted to sign him for like $10 million, $9 million a year, $11 million a year, something lower than OBJ. So for me, I feel like, if he wanted to get paid, he got his money. He didn't go too bad of a team, but realistically, if he wanted to win, he could have, take a pay cut and go to one of those teams that he wanted to. Go play with one of those quarterbacks that he wanted to. The quarterbacks he listed and the quarterback that he's playing with now is levels, between each other. So, he's been jumping around teams. He's used to playing with subpar quarterbacks. So for him, I feel like he's used to it. I feel like he's contingent with what he's doing, and he didn't go to too bad of a team. So for me, it's all about the money for him.
I think he just could have landed himself in a better situation, man. I think, for him, it could have ended a little bit differently. Obviously there's a lot of teams that had interested in him. One being the Buffalo Bills. That's where the fire was coming from, for the beginning of the free agency, for the beginning of the offseason, where there's smoke, there's fire. I thought he was going to end up on one of the 2 teams between them and the Kansas City Chiefs, because I feel like everybody wants to. For a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, I just thought he wanted to put himself in a better situation, in a championship situation where it's pretty much Super Bowl or bust for him. kind of similar to what Von Miller did. When he wanted out, he wanted to ring with the LA Rams. He wanted to put himself in a different situation to win a championship again. He went to Buffalo. Hasn't panned out yet, but obviously the Buffalo Bills are always going to be that team that's going to be right there, try to compete for a Super Bowl. But I think for DeAndre Hopkins to list his demands and pretty much only hit on one of the three, it's just a kind of like a head scratcher. He could have definitely put himself in a better spot. I know the Patriots showed some interest, but the Patriots and the Tennessee Titans are pretty much on the same playing field in terms of obviously talent and all that stuff. So it's like they're not Super Bowl contending teams. But for him, Hopkins want a stable management. I think the Tennessee Titans just signed a new GM. Quarterback that loves the game. He could have gone to a lot of teams that had a quarterback that loves the game, like Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen. So for me, I just feel like it's a better situation for him, especially at the age that he's at right now, being 31. Obviously, there's not much time left for DeAndre Hopkins in this league, as we all know. Because obviously, if people really believed in his talent still and all that stuff, he'd still be on the Arizona Cardinals right now. But obviously, they're trying to go in a different direction. DeAndre Hopkins isn't trying to sink with the sinking ship. So I completely understand that. But for him to just sign with this Tennessee Titans football team, like Big H mentioned, man, it's from a money standpoint. Not a lot of these top contending teams wanted to pay this guy what he wanted. And so obviously he took the first available offer that was available to him. And that was from the Tennessee Titans. And, now he's only getting paid a salary of $12 million a year with a 2-year, $26 million deal with $3 million a year in available in incentives. And so it's a good contract for him, at the age that he's at. But, I think for me, DeAndre Hopkins, who I consider to be a top wide receiver in this league, could have put himself in a better position possible, to win a Super Bowl. Now, obviously the Tennessee Titans, we're going to see what they're able to put out there on display once the season kicks off. But I think, as we all know, these guys are just going to be one of those teams like the Washington Commanders, just kind of being right there for that the number one spot and for the division, or in a different situation than the Commanders. The Commanders are a wild card team. These guys are competing for the division title. But I guess we're just going to have to wait and see, man. But with that being said, though, that pretty much wraps up our episode for today. Any final words before we sign off here?
Man, this is training camp, man. During training camp, you hear a lot. I swear to God, I think everybody is the best player in the league according to training camp. Bro. Like, I'll never understand it. They gas up everybody. So I never take it serious.
Hey, a guy gets a one-hand pick, man. He's the next, Champ Bailey or something. Man.
Like reportedly, he's destroying camp. Reportedly, he's been killing competition. I hate training camp, man. It's the most boring time because everybody's apparently the best player in the league.
Yeah. Someone gets a 30-yard catch. Oh, he's the next up-and-coming Antonio Brown. He's the next Chad Johnson. Just get ready. He's ready. He's here. That's
what I'm saying. Like, training camp is almost, like, I swear, like, it's like this one Twitter page, NFL Rookie Watch. Everybody, according to that page, is unbelievable. You'll see some random tight end talking about, this guy is reportedly the next Travis Kelce. I'm like, what? Come on, man.
No, I mean, we've reached that stage in the NFL offseason. Obviously with training kicking around. I think for me, the injuries that have just been piling up. It hasn't even been a full week of training camp, and we're seeing guys getting carted off left and right. Obviously a notable name, Joe Burrow, on Friday or Thursday. Getting carted off with a calf injury. Luckily, it was just a calf strain. He'll be just fine. I heard he was walking around the training facility today, just with the calf sleeve. Pretty good, in terms of just walking. But Jalen Ramsey being out for the Miami Dolphins, CJ Gardner-Johnson was getting carted off. Garrett Wilson injured himself. So Seattle's running back room is a bit banged up right now going into week one now. Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet. It's going to be uncertain whether those guys are going to be available. But
bad injuries, man.
It's just like, for me, I don't understand why guys are going so hard in training camp. Like, I understand iron sharpens iron, but like, there's no reason for Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner to be going at 100 miles per hour just in training camp in the first couple of days. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. It's the only sport in the world where I hear people get injured in training camp. We don't hear any injuries in training camp coming out of the NBA or any other sport. It's just this specific sport where guys are excited to get out there on the field after being away for so long. And next thing you know, 1 to 2 practices in, when they're trying to get themselves back into playing shape, some sort of catastrophic injury happens. And so it's just like, if I'm a top guy on the team, like, for example, the Cincinnati Bengals, if I'm Joe Burrow, if I'm Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, I'm just like treating training camp as a whole walkthrough. Like I don't have to go 100 miles per hour. Like I know I'm gonna play. I know I can produce. Like I'm just gonna go through the motions. Obviously the fans and the media are gonna be there watching. They could take their notes and say whatever they want to say, but I know come week 1, I'll be locked in and ready to go. Leave the training camp to all the other guys, that the third stringers, the second stringers, the guys that are fighting for a starting position. Let those guys battle it out. But if you're one of those top franchises and you're throwing your best guys out there for training camp and they somewhat get hurt, that changes the whole trajectory of your season. Like your season is pretty much done if one of your top players goes down. So I'll never understand that. I'll never really wrap my head around it. Just guys going 100 miles per hour in training camp, like I just don't understand it, man. And Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner going at it was just like the one that pushed me, the straw that brought the camel's back for me, man. Like I understand those. Sauce Gardner's your best corner.
I'm a fan of that, bro. Like iron sharpens iron, man. Let these niggas go at it, bro.
Nah,
we gotta see that, man. We need that, man. That's serious stuff, bro.
I'm not too sure, but it's serious stuff. But at the end of the day, you're putting your best players at risk.
They got too much
injured.
pride. Like if I'm Garrett Wilson, I'm going up against the number 1 cornerback in the NFL, and if I'm Sauce Gardner, I'm going up against one of the best young talents in the NFL. I'm like, let's get at it. Let's go to work. You can't make stuff easy for him.
And then what happens if one of your guys get injured?
I think they just like, okay, like after, let's say for example, like there's one play where where Garrett Wilson got him. After he gets you and he beats you, I think they just let it go. Like guys just stop playing. Like that's it. It's like a touch tackle. That's about it. We have guys like 5'2", Deuce Vaughn, right? like come on, bro. Like if guys are really serious, they could have cracked him. You feel me? They could have sent him to the hospital. The guy's like 5'3", running through the hole. Like, really think anybody's not gonna just like kill him if they wanted to?
This guy's like Darren Sproles that succeeded like that, man. Come on, don't hate.
No, bro, like Darren Sproles is a little bit taller, bro. Come on.
Nah, man, Deuce Vaughn, man, he look out there looking like a kid. Oh my god, I thought that video was edited, man, but unfortunately it was not.
The tweet got me, man. This is my little brother. I actually believe that. I was like,
your little brother plays against your big brother.
It's just, obviously as we go through training camp, man, I hope all the top players in the league don't get injured. They all avoid injury. Obviously we have a couple guys that had some scares, a couple guys that are going to be out, but of course, as training camp comes to a close in a couple of weeks, I'm hoping everybody's locked in and ready to go for week 1, man. NFL season is right around the corner and we're all excited. We've been waiting for it since the NBA season ended, since the whole NFL season ended. It's been a long time. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and close out this episode here. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. We really appreciate your love and support. We'd really appreciate it if you like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at New Media Podcast. And for those of you that are watching us on YouTube, all of our social media handles will be at the end of this video. And if you're listening to us on Apple and Spotify, if you go to our Instagram page at New Media Podcast, you'll be able to navigate yourself to all of our social media handles there. So once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And of course, we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Record a new hit, then we making us a film. Wouldn't sign a deal if I got a couple mil. Been in the lab, now they throwing out deals. Me and now Lakes, now that's overkill.